Hey everybody, welcome to Birth Podcast. I'm Ash, and I'm bringing Regina Padilla with me today. She is a amazing yoga instructor and meditation coach who lives in Maui, and we met in Bali a few years ago, and we've just stayed connected. And I just love her spirit and love her heart, and we regularly have conversations where we think, geez, why don't we just have why don't we have the microphones on? So we recently started talking about this idea of adding an interesting layer to our yoga practice, which is doing it blindfolded. And we're going to kind of get into how we sort of navigated our way to this space. But I wanted to just share with you what our experiences have been in the past week since we talked about it. And so join us today.
Hello, hello. Wow, that was quite the introduction. I feel
Well,
honored.
I'm inspired by you all the time. I love the work you're doing. And I just thought our conversation last week, about a week ago, I guess, yeah, it was just really fascinating.
Likewise with the inspiration.
Practices you've done this week, I'm curious what those practices have felt like for you. And we're not just talking about closing your eyes, we're talking about adding a layer of a blindfold where even if you open your eyes, you can't see. So there's pressure there. And it's kind of a loss of a sensory function for a period of time. And yeah, just talk about how you felt in that space.
Right. Wow. It was shifting. First of all, I was introduced to the idea of just doing this by actually I went to Burning Man this year.
I love that.
And
Yep.
and yeah, everything comes from Burning Man. Just kidding. But I was there this year. I love going. I'm a third year burner, and they have all these camps that are just set up in different themed camps. And this one had this workshop. Some have workshops, some have bars, whatever. It's a whole city. But this one place had a workshop about blindfolding and being introduced to people without sight. And just, I didn't ultimately end up going. I got carried off by other things, which was just fine. But ultimately, the idea of it stuck with me. And I was like intrigued by it. I was interested by it. I wanted to do some kind of practice with just a blindfold, whether it was just meditation, movement, introducing myself to someone or with someone that's already in my life, and just taking away the sight, maybe feeling them, like, just that whole idea. And so we came together and decided to do a few practices, and it was the first one was definitely challenging. Like, it really showed me the challenging aspect of just initially going into something you're not used to, and just like my balance was extremely challenged. And like some
Yeah.
of the things that are difficult but I felt that I was good at were extremely hard. And I just it made me laugh at myself, which I thought ultimately is really healthy, just to be able to laugh at ourselves when we make mistakes or when we fall, whatever, and get back up, and just having that lightheartedness about it, both in serious situations and not. So that was one of the biggest things for me, was just the intensified challenge of everything that I usually feel more comfortable in.
It's the word balance that you used, and I thought that was one of the more interesting things about it. So I came to this because, one, you told me the story, but two, I've been watching a show on, I think it's an Apple TV show, but it's called See, and it's one of Jason Momoa's projects, and he's basically part of a world hundreds of years into the future where humans are generally no longer born with sight. So the sight has been taken from people.
I've heard about this.
And so they're kind of all tribalized, and it's got a little bit of a post-apocalyptic feel to it, but it's shot really beautifully and so forth. But what's interesting is that his character's children, are born with sight. And so there's kind of this conflict about whether or not sight should be acceptable or not, because they've lived so many centuries without it, that there's even a group of people who think that children with sight are witches. And there's another group
figure.
think
Humans.
that is another group of people who are more like the scientific ones that think they can make use of this and take advantage of it. So there's all these unique aspects and conversations around how sight is both beneficial, but also for those who are like great fighters and warriors, how sight actually would prohibit them in such great things. Because he, of course, Jason Momoa's character is considered like the great warrior. He's one of the best. He can hear everything. He can hear the way people walk, all this. He's considered, and it's interesting how his son has to learn to fight in a different way because he has sight. His daughter the same. So it's really interesting when you brought that story to me, the idea of the first thing I noticed, not just in the show, but as we were talking about a practice, is feeling our body and feeling balance. And I think when I did my practices this past week, that was the number one thing I noticed, is where I felt maybe weaker in my balance in a way that I hadn't thought about before, because the only thing I could do is feel it. I couldn't see it. So I feel like sometimes we see our balance, we almost like justify, be like, oh, I'm half doing it, I'll be fine. Oh, I'm in the right position. But when you feel it, you're like, no, I'm really going to fall over. So you have to slow down. But what pose did you feel challenged you?
Warrior 3.
Okay.
Warrior 3 for sure, or really any balance on one foot was extremely different with my eyes open versus blindfolded, let alone just with your eyes closed, but blindfolded to a point where you feel pressure against your eyes and you can't open the eyelids. Like, it's just a whole nother, it's just, I'm not even really sure at the moment how to explain that in words, but it's just different. And let me tell you, like, I love, like, sight is a beautiful thing, and our eyes are super delicate. And it is then definitely an aspect of that allows beauty in to our beings, and us to receive that and appreciate that and take different perspectives. But at the same time, I find immense value, especially now that I've started practicing this, but immense value in intentionally limiting specific sensory, like whether it's hearing, put earplugs in, or have headphones that actually intensify the sounds, the little sounds. Blindfold yourself, play with breath work, hold your breath, exhale all the way out, hold that, play with the flow, keep it going, just the different aspects of all of it. And I definitely think, like, sight and removing sight definitely enhances the other sensory pathways and allows you to get more in tune with them. And I think that is immensely beneficial to practices of any sort, whether it be, some kind of martial arts, or simply just your own practice of meditation or yoga. And definitely enhances your ability to tap into those senses and be more aware of touch, of hearing what's around you, of even sensing the movements of the energy around you when things move, because that sends out a vibration, right? And most of the time we're not tuned into that because we're so visual. But just to practice removing that and really tuning in, and then bringing it back, and like being more in tune with all of it. So you're seeing it, but you're also been practicing just feeling. And like with balance, with Warrior 3, like I could feel, it was so hard. Like, I could feel myself in the pose that I'm so comfortable with, and I can move in and with my eyesight, but then I take away my eyesight and all of a sudden I feel my toes and I feel my balance shifting. And like, it was quite difficult at first to actually find my balance. And like, even once I had been practicing for a little bit, it was still challenging to like actually lift my hands up and balance only on my foot. And I could do it for like a moment or two, gradually getting better. But it was just, and then the first practice versus the second practice and the third practice, each was different. And maybe it's because I'm a yogi and I've been practicing for over 10 years every day or whatever, as often as I can. Hopefully it's every day. And so maybe I'm just a little bit more tuned into my own practice, but ultimately it was just The first one was very challenging. I felt very unbalanced. But then the second one, I felt so much more in control and connection with my body. It was so different from the first practice. And then the second practice, and I even did one after that with just my eyes closed, no blindfold, and it was different because of the restriction, versus just the option, choosing to close your eyes versus not being able to open your eyes. It's a different mentality about it, and it just does something to your brain, having
I think
something.
so too. There's definitely a space. I do want to just briefly say to all of our brothers and sisters out there who live every day without sight, we will never know the journey that you go on, but I have such honor and respect because there is such a uniqueness in being able to learn how to appreciate the world with something that I value so much in myself. I value my ability to see. I value my ability to be visually perceptive. Especially for someone who has done the work I've done in journalism, where I would often stop and I would take in and use my visual as a way to absorb what I was seeing in order to put it on paper. But it is a different practice. And sometimes it's something that, it's not that I didn't know how to feel my body beforehand, but it's made me more concentrated about my body. Even things like during meditation, I've had, some cracks and squeaks and my bones and joints and everything else. But what's interesting is when I sit there and I take my hands and I begin to just feel those spaces around my body and those pressure points around my muscles, joints, it's like, oh, that's exactly where it is. That's where, if I go into a, PT or an osteo or something like that, I can actually direct them about where it is because I've taken the time to really understand and feel it with my hands. I also think you brought up an interesting point about sound. When we remove one sense and we open up another, how do you feel in your practices that sound connected for you?
Well, it's interesting because I love to move to music. I find myself always almost doing that. So I have to try to actually have silent practices. And I did that this time. And I listen to all kinds of not all kinds of music, but lyrical, upbeat, but also very mellow. So it just depends on my mood and what kind of practice I want to have. But definitely it definitely put me in my sensory. Like I had moments where it's so, and it does, I do this when I just close my eyes sometimes, and it's like this mental thing that I try to figure out. Like I go into the meditation or the practice, and all of a sudden, like randomly, I'll be like, I feel like someone's watching me, or I feel like someone's right next to me. And I'm almost like I have to take my eyes out and look because I'm just like, what the? Oh. And then I'm like, okay, no, like you're totally making that up. There's no one there. Like I'm in my living room, like gated house, like there's no one there. Like, and if it was, it'd be my mother and she'd say something next, like, or whatever, like, but these fears pop up. And when we eliminate what we're used to, change of any kind brings fear, brings shifting. But the sounds, I think it was more like my mentality than the sounds that brought on like the shifting. But like I had to come to the realization that my music was playing like over and over and over and over, and I was like, oh wait, I can't actually like hear the world. So I turned my music off and I got into that, and it was interesting because like I would go deeper into myself. Because of the blindfold, I had nowhere to look. I had nothing to see to draw my attention outwards into the world. But randomly, I would hear like a lawnmower or like an engine or, kids laughing in the yard next door. And it would just cast me out into the world for a moment. And one of my students once, David, he would tell me like, because I was talking about how the practice of yoga, and in it, you have these distractions, you're next to a busy road, your studio, whatever, and oftentimes yogis or people get frustrated with that. Like, oh my God, like I'm trying to practice, you're being so rude. And it's like, yeah, okay, I get that. But at the same time, like he brought my attention to like whatever that noise in the world is, whether it's construction workers, a car on the road, that's the sound of children getting fed, because that person is on their way somewhere to do their life and make their living and feed their family and grow and learn and whatever, and so just taking that sound, that distraction, and changing your perception of it from, oh my God, you're so annoying, to just letting it be what it is and not letting it bring up these emotions that take control of you, but also just being able to be like, okay, what's happening within me right now? And why is this? Oh, okay, cool. Like, let's come back to the breath. And am I going to get mad at this thing that's going to be there regardless if I get mad or not? Or am I going to use this as an opportunity to go within myself and find what's being triggered and work on that, or shift that, or breathe into that, or feel into that, lean into that, become a space where that can exist for any amount of time it needs to breathe through whatever the sound or distraction or the whatever it is that's causing this disruption of your energy, and the ability to accumulate practices that help you to identify those things.
It's really beautiful to talk about kind of moving into it, right? And really kind of maybe using that sound to evaluate our spaces.
I'm very like, for lack of a better way of explaining it right now, I'll go to the normal term of like ADD, just my attention goes. I'm trying to get better at rephrasing that. And I call it squirrely a lot. Like, I'm squirrely, like I'll just randomly like squirrel. My brain is somewhere else. But that happens to a lot of people, and that's a normal thing. You should fight that. So like, allow yourself to notice, oh, squirrely, and then bring yourself back. And I will definitely admit that I have been able to, over time, come back to my center faster and faster through the practice of becoming aware of when that happens.
I think I told you at one point, I'm actually really close to an airport, but I don't think twice about it. So in my practice, when I'm kind of listening really carefully, I actually notice there's a low hum in the air almost all the time.
Right.
And I didn't really think about it always being there, but it's because the airport's right there, but I don't think about that. The planes are coming in and out all day. So it's kind of going into that sound, and it almost takes on its own, I don't know, song, maybe.
Right.
Or the fact that the church bells at the church in the village, I figured out the timing. At every hour it goes off the hour that it is. So at 8 o'clock, it rings 8 times. At 9 o'clock, it rings 9 times. At 10 o'clock.
Cool.
And I didn't realize that the first day, but then the second time I went into the practice, I was like, oh, I counted. And it must be about this time. It must be about that time. And so it was actually telling time. So it's kind of fascinating. And I think you're right, because I think there's a moment of like squirreliness that happens where we sort of get distracted, but there's almost a way to go into, when you go into the sound, you almost find your centeredness because you're focused on that point.
Well, and not only you actually understand yourself better and those things that pull you away.
Right.
It's very interesting to me, and I've been exploring this more, how sound projects you places, into the past, into the future. Like, I was having, and maybe it's past lives, I don't know, but like I was having sounds, like whether it be children, and it would pass me back to like my nieces and nephews being real small, or like just a memory randomly of like a kid in a moment when I was just like, it'll bring up the most random situations, an ex-relationship, and like, where did that come from? And so like, sounds to me are very interesting, because I like to allow them space to bring up whatever they're going to bring up, because, and then why? Like, sometimes it's just like, well, I have no idea, there's no whatever, and just cast it off. But it was interesting. When my eyesight can open, I'm like, whatever, I can move, I can close my eyes, no problem. But for some reason, when my eyes are like closed, or like a blindfold is on, I will get like, I don't know, like the slightest noise, and I almost have this like sensation where I have to look, right? I have to see what it is. I have to make sure that like I'm okay. or whatever. And I try to come back into myself and be like, okay, where is this fear coming from?
There's definitely a room to be able to kind of look at, listen to, create space for being able to enhance how our ears connect to our deepest wounds, our deepest anxieties, our deepest fears, things that may be related to childhood that we may or may not remember, depending on how we've experienced it in our body. It's a very somatic experience, and we take for granted that we have all these unique abilities, but yet we don't focus on cultivating them. So by taking away one of your senses, it gives you a chance to cultivate a different sense. And then, like you mentioned earlier, putting earplugs in and maybe taking away sound for a little while and cultivating sight or cultivating how you feel. And we have to do this for ourselves as much as we do it with our friends, lovers, partners, those in between. There is something truly, it is an erotic experience. It's a life experience. It's a life force. It's a movement within our bodies that forces us to pay attention to how we interact with ourselves. So I definitely think I would like to challenge anyone listening to this, whether you are a yogi or not, to find some time in the coming week to put a blindfold on for an hour.
Yeah.
Whether you move around your kitchen, whether you sit on a yoga mat and do a practice, whether you maybe you're an artist and you paint something, or you draw something, or you play something, whatever. Do express a practice for you without your eyes, and concentrate on each and every feeling, and concentrate on those private moments that come up for you that are really hard. What are your anxieties, your fears, your depressions, your difficulties, your stresses, your strains, and where is it in your body? I think this is an important
I'm really holding space for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Giving yourself patience to have space for that.
Where do you feel like you carry your most stress and strain when you feel like a moment of anxiety? Where does it just kind of come up for you?
Definitely my belly and lower back. And it'll travel up my spine, shoulders. Yeah. So I'm always like, oh my God, hold on, I need to go do some twists or something. But
please, any of these practices that you guys try out, we want to hear about it. We want to hear about your experience. We want to hear about what comes up for you, how you felt like you connected to yourself. At the end of this month, there will be a workshop. It is my Halloween harvest workshop. It's not really about Halloween, but we do it the weekend, but we do it the week of, toward the end of the month. And last year's workshop was fantastic. I'd like to invite all of you guys to come. I will put a link to that event in the description box below. We will be doing some of these exercises that are going to actually isolate each one of your senses. We're going to take away sight. We're going to take away sound. We're going to take away touch for a moment. We're going to emphasize and cultivate each one for a little bit. And I've decided to call this one Discovering Your Self Eroticism, because our eroticism is felt and understood through our sensory and our nervous system, our sensory system, our brain system. It all works together to give us the full experience of pleasure and of pain. So I'm going to take you guys through that, and I would love for you guys to sign up and join us for the workshop. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. If you are going to Maui, check out her classes, her sunset and sunrise. And if you are somebody who's looking for meditation, mindfulness, breath coach, she can actually do it online anywhere in the world. Check out her link, and
brilliant. It's all connected.
It's all connected.
Thank you so much, Ash.
Thanks.